Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Burn Desire Show. So today I'm with James Hamilton. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And this is one of those where I just read an article in the Financial Times about security, and particularly it was referencing the mainly the tech CEOs and Amazon and all these different tech companies, and how the budgets for security or personal security for the founders, CEOs, and high-profile executives are increasing quite substantially. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to understand, well, a variety of things about that space. But as always, I like to understand the person first and then potentially what they actually do. So yeah, I looked into how you started. No, I always go back to people's school education. Like, were you an academic guy? Like, what sort of person were you back then?
No, I mean, in high school, I didn't even know if I was going to go to college. I really was. A lot of times you'll read about law enforcement people who could have been criminals, and I think I was definitely in that group. If I had gone one way or the other, or I was pulled over a number of times. If the officer had arrested me, I probably would have gone the criminal route. But I got lucky and had a guardian angel, I guess, and then I went the law enforcement route. But yeah, that's kind of how it started. I went to college, but my grades weren't great. I went to a military college because I needed discipline, and then I wanted to go in the military, and that didn't work out. So I started to
So
look
when,
around.
in terms of military colleges, because it's not, so, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's particularly uh, a thing in the UK. So what
Mhm.
does that actually mean, and why would someone go down that route versus going to a regular college?
Yeah, in the U, I don't know the equivalent in the UK, but in the US, you can go to the Naval Academy or West Point or the Air Force Academy. And then you have an immediate commission as an officer in the United States military in either any of the branches of the four. And then kind of, I would say, I guess underneath those they're still four-year colleges, but they're military schools where you pay your own way. So in the first three examples I cited, the government pays for you to go there because you get an appointment, and
Hmm.
then everything's for free. And then you have a guaranteed job. And then for those that couldn't get in, I guess I shouldn't really say that. They're prestigious, but there's military schools where you're paying your own way, and then you don't have to go in the military. So you would go there, for instance, just for the discipline, or like in my case, the state of South Carolina has a military college called the Citadel, and it's very popular, and it's a point of pride in this state if you went there, and the network is amazing. So you could get a job in the civilian world through the network of alumni, and so that's very appealing to people. And then people like me who really needed discipline and needed kind of a guide rod as to where are you going next. So that school really changed my life, taught me discipline, attention to detail, being on time, how to dress, all of those things that really kind of led to where I'm at today. But yeah, it changed my life
So
without a
is it
doubt.
with that, how does the military college, apart from what you're actually studying, like how does it differ to a regular college? Like,
Yeah, so we lived in barracks. You were in companies, or we were subdivided into companies and regiments. We wore uniforms every single day. You
oh
had
well.
a physical fitness standard, a grooming standard. You had to shave every day, haircuts. When you went out, it was in Charleston, South Carolina, a beautiful town, but you couldn't really enjoy it because when you went out in the town, you were in uniform. So you
Oh,
were in a military environment 24/7, and you had to take an ROTC. So you could choose Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, but you had to take one. So it was definitely a military academy. And then some people would directly commission into the military, afterwards, but you didn't have to.
and again, is it the same as the regular college system where you can choose classes and what you major in, etc., or is it kind of a specific route you got to go down?
Yeah, and we were really strong in engineering. Obviously, I didn't major in that, but we have a very strong engineering program. But I majored in political science, law and criminal justice, started kind of that police route. I did an internship with the police department, and that's kind of where it all started. When I knew I couldn't get in the military, basically I just banged my flight physical. I couldn't pass the flight physical. I wanted to fly. That was fun. And then I was like, well, I got to do something. And so I was doing this law enforcement ride along kind of internship. And I thought it was incredible that you could get paid to, chase bad guys. So that's what I ended up doing. I looked around. I was like, well, the FBI seems like the biggest, thing in the country. So I went to the FBI office and said, "How do I become an FBI agent?" And this really great agent, I don't remember his name, he said, "Hey, go to law school or go become a police officer." So I went and became a police officer. And that's exactly what happened. I was a cop for 5 years and I applied for the FBI and I was one of very few people who were selected. And I became an FBI agent in 97. So yeah.
I've spoken to some time ago another police officer from the United States, and it was the thing that I found interesting. I'm sure maybe it's the same the experience that you had is he said, which is something that someone that's not familiar with like law enforcement just doesn't think about. And particularly, I think more so in countries like the United States where firearms and people having firearms is very different to say in the UK. He was saying like you just never knew one moment to the next what you were going to face, whether it was domestic violence case or whether it's someone with a gun, like whatever its case may be. Like I think maybe it's a UK thing or someone that's not like familiar with that space. You just don't think of it as being so contrasting and different, like how things you can just like pull up to.
Yeah, I think it would shock you. And I can tell you, my first, golly, my first shift, I hadn't even been to the police academy. I was literally handed a gun, a 38 caliber revolver, and a uniform and a badge, and I was told to meet at a certain station at a certain time and meet my training officer. And I literally, that's what I did. I turned up, as you would say, I turned up and then I met him and I got in the car with him and we drove around and we were literally catching calls, going to domestics, dealing with drunken disorderlies, blah, blah, blah. And about 5 hours into my shift, he said, "Hey, can you shoot? Do you know how to shoot?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I grew up shooting, but I haven't been to a police academy, if that's what you're saying." And I'm not kidding you. He took me to a rock pile, threw a can in the rock pile and said, "Well, shoot that can." And I hit it. And then he said, "Okay, I guess you're good." I mean, I'm telling that story with a straight face, but that really happened.
That's
And
incredible.
right. And then, so then within 3 months, a guy I knew was killed in the line of duty.
Wow.
And so, everything about, at least for me, that job, it was very real and it's visceral because I mean, you felt it. If you've never been to a police funeral, it's terrible. But it really let me understand this job's different. You may not come home from work today. I mean, it's that dangerous. And it happened, just a domestic dispute. But it can turn very, very violent very, very quickly. But I was also very, very comfortable with violence. I always had been as a kid, grew up in that environment type deal, and it didn't bother me one bit. But yeah, it was an eye opener for sure. And you're right, the gun thing, I speak publicly and I always say, there's more guns than people in America.
Wow.
And that's a shocking statistic, but it's true. And I think in the UK, you hear something like that and you just maybe can't put your head around it.
Yeah.
But every call you go on, there's, well, at least our gun and your gun's present, and then they probably have a gun in the house, if not multiple. So it's just a part of our culture, unfortunately, or fortunately.
Another question I asked again, this police officer that I did previously was with that, I think you've alluded to it, but with that role where, you don't know what each call is going to be and what the day is going to be, when you then clock off duty, as it were, like, were you the sort of person that can just switch off and go be a normal civilian, or like, does it play on your mind as to what's happened during the day? Like, how did you kind of decompress from that?
Yeah, like most police officers, you drink on the weekends or on the days off, and you get with other police officers, and that's very unhealthy. I mean, that's just, but there's no guidance as to like, okay, what should you do to decompress or to come down, or you can't talk about it at work. I will tell you, okay, very, very, very early on. I wasn't carrying my gun off duty. I was trying to have a normal life, as you would say. And I went to dinner with my wife we have a restaurant called Applebee's. I don't know if you have that in the UK.
No, but I'm aware of it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's even around anymore, whatever. And I'm at dinner with my wife, and I see a guy I had arrested, and he's just, yeah, he's in the bar drinking, and he's giving me this look like he's burning through me. And I was like, oh boy. I now remembered who he was, and he came over and he said, "Hey, deputy, is this your wife?"
Wow.
Yeah. And I was unarmed, and I mean, always felt like I was capable, without a gun. But man, it really made me think. And then, yeah, you saw a lot of things that are just truly awful. And it's very, very difficult. And, I would say that I wasn't, after 5 years of doing that type of work, I wasn't the same person who started. It takes a toll on you without a doubt. And I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad I got out of it and went to the FBI, which was obviously a little bit different. You weren't dealing with that type of stuff on the daily. Patrol officer sees things far worse than, what maybe an agent would see on a daily basis.
When it comes to as well, when you went down that law enforcement route, the your friends and family, like what was did their perception of you and how they were around you change at all? Like because you had that role?
I think so, to some degree. I think it wasn't, a shock. So when people heard that I was doing that, they kind of put together the military school and
Okay.
they're like, yeah, that probably makes sense. Um, I don't, I don't remember ever, someone being shocked. But then I think I lost some friends, who knew I went into that work. And you had to draw a line at some point. There were some people that maybe you had in your past that were maybe on the wrong side of things,
Hmm.
and you kind of had to not engage with that. Especially when I got further on with the FBI, they're much more stringent with regards to friends, family, acquaintances. You had to report all kinds of things to them. So it was far different within the FBI than at the local level.
So let's kind of continue on there. So you did the 5 years or so in local enforcement, and was it 5 years because that was the amount of time that you kind of had to do almost for experience level, or like why no more, why no less? Because obviously your intention was the FBI always, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way the FBI works, I can't speak to how it is today. I don't know. I just from back then the way it was. You either had to have a degree, a law degree, or an accounting degree to go straight into the FBI. And if you didn't have those two things, you had to have 3 years of work experience. And they didn't really care what you did, landscaper, law enforcement, they don't care.
Right.
You just had to be successful in whatever you did. So after 3 years in law enforcement, I applied. And I did not hear a word. You'll love this. Your listeners will love this. I did not hear one word for over a year, an entire calendar year. So I applied after at the 3 year mark. I did not hear a word. And this is before email. And my wife and I just figured, well, I guess I didn't get it. So we moved on with our lives type of deal. I became a detective. We bought a house. And I'm thinking, this is my lot. I mean, I'll just be, local law enforcement. Nothing wrong with that. I was going to be law enforcement for 20 years. Fine.
Mhm.
Anyway, after a year, the FBI reached out to me on a Sunday and said, "Hey, are you still interested in being an agent?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, can you get on a plane tomorrow morning and fly down to Jacksonville, Florida for an interview?" I mean, that's how it was working. It was weird.
Right.
And I said, and luckily I was off that day. And I said, yeah. And so then I went down and, then it got a little faster with background investigation, polygraph, all that stuff, but that takes forever. And then I finally got in. So it just took a while. So no, 5 years wasn't but there is a 37. You have to be before your 37th birthday to get in because they have a 20-year requirement. And so that gets you up to 57. So I have a mandatory retirement age of 57. So at 30, you can't be in at 38. So yeah, there is a little bit of a timetable on you. But I got in very young. I was 27 years old when I got in there. Yeah, and I was off and running. Went to Quantico, went to the academy, and
You mentioned something interesting, just to circle back. You mentioned that they wanted to make sure like people were successful in whatever they did, right? When it
yep.
comes to like a law enforcement officer, what makes someone successful versus not successful? Like how does someone even define that?
Yeah, be promoted. So
Right,
I had been promoted up. I become a corporal and then a detective. And so
right.
that looked better. And they're just looking on a piece of paper.
Got
So
it.
if you're looking at a person on a piece of paper who's become a corporal and a detective versus a guy who's stayed a patrol officer for 5 straight years, well,
Yeah.
then you're going to go with the guy that's been promoted.
Right,
Uh,
okay.
Right. They're just trying to see, have you got better? And my class was very interesting. I mean, we went around the room, the FBI Academy class had 50 people in it. And I would tell you, I felt woefully underqualified. There were, Naval Academy, West Point, Army Rangers, Marine Recon, very impressive lawyers, accountants. We had a doctor. We actually had a NASA astronaut in there. So
Wow.
I was like overwhelmed, and I was just a police officer from South Carolina. So that was it was humbling for sure because the people were just amazing, and more degrees than a thermometer. And I barely had a bachelor's degree. So,
So can you talk much about what the interview process was like?
yeah, it was just an oral interview with a bunch of agents, like a panel. And then you talk a lot about your background and how you could be a benefit to the FBI. There's an awful lot of, what did you do? Not a lot of what did the team do? So you really had to kind of sell yourself. And you could come away from that experience feeling, well, that's a little bit self-centered, but that is exactly what they were looking for. They didn't want somebody who was part of the team. They were looking for someone who led a team. That's really what they were kind of wanting. And then, once I got through that, it was relatively easy with regards to the background and the polygraph and the physical fitness test. That was all fine. Um, but it just took a while, and that's the government, at least the American government. It just takes forever to get things done. But yeah,
Like
eventually you
when they're doing the likes of a background check, like what are they other than the obvious? Like are they just like literally going into everyone that your family and history and if you've had any misdemeanors, is it that kind of thing they're looking for?
full. So it's all criminal. So misdemeanor, felony, civil, any lawsuits you've been involved in. It's family. Like, what is your family up to? What do they do for a living? Because there's a national security component to it. They
Hmm.
don't want to hire a spy. They don't want to hire somebody that's got allegiance to some other country. So there's a lot of the family, what do they do? What's their business? What are they involved in?
They interview them and reach out to them, or they, is it
Oh
more?
yeah, no, they not only interview them, then they do what's called developed references. So you might tell them, hey, they might ask for 5 references. And of course, you're going to give them 5 names of 5 people who are going to sing your praises.
Yeah,
Well, hopefully, right?
yeah.
So what they do is they go to those 5 and they say, give me 5 more. And so they have to come up with 5 different names. So now that list is now 25. And so I was literally getting calls from people who I hadn't talked to since high school. And they're like, hey, are you applying for the FBI? I'm like, yeah. And they said, wow, because I just talked to an agent about you. I'm like, how the hell they get your name? And that's what happened. It
Oh,
was
I
a develop.
see.
Yeah. And so they're very good at it. They've been doing it, very, very long time. But yeah, I got through all that and, kind of went to training school.
You mentioned the 20 years. Is it like you have to have a 20-year commitment, or what's the reason for that 37 to 57? Because surely not everyone take stays for 20 years, right? Or maybe they, or they do they?
No, I mean, I got out early. No, you have to leave by 57. They will
Yeah.
not allow you to continue to carry a gun and make arrest older than 57. So that was the thing. To get in and get your 20, if you will, or yeah, so that you were ending at 57,
Oh,
you
okay.
had to at least get in at 37, so you could do your full time and get your retirement and all that stuff.
I'm curious as well. It is skipping forward, a bit, but you mentioned within the class of 50 that you kind of in your cohort, that a lot of them felt you very much more successful or accomplished at that time. Did then, if you fast forward to say now, I don't know how much people you still in contact with, like, did that then their initial success end up that they became more successful? Or I'm sure you're now in a very, yourself in a very kind of successful position. I'm just curious as to whether that initial success then extrapolated out to them being successful too, or actually you booked the odds there.
That's a really good question. I don't know that there's a tie. I don't know that there, but I would say this: there was some security they had because they could go do something else, and I'll tell you how that manifests. So the way the Bureau works is they have 56 field offices, big cities throughout the country, and let's say in the way that works, basically, it's just a blind monkeys throwing darts at a map, and you get assigned to some city, and they kind of make you feel like you have a say in the matter, but truth is, you really don't. And you're going to go where they tell you you're going to go, right? And so I got a little town called Omaha, Nebraska, which is in the dead middle of America.
I know
I
that
didn't,
because of Warren Buffett.
yeah, exactly. So
So
yeah, I didn't know anything about Omaha, but what am I going to do? I'm a police officer from South Carolina. What are you going to do? Quit? I didn't have a lot of options. So I said, yeah, I'm going to go.
hmm.
Versus someone in my class who, let's say, is a lawyer and they got some undesirable location, let's say, and they said, I'm not going. and they'll
Oh,
quit. I saw it. They would just quit and they would go back to the law school or I'm sorry, the law firm because
right.
they had something, right? And so that gives you a lot of security versus if you didn't have a background like that, you had to kind of take what the Bureau gave you and you better make the best of it. Now, how did they, did some of them get higher ranked than others? I don't think there's any tie. I saw people of, my level, I guess, law enforcement, a police officer who became very high up in the Bureau. And I also saw people who were lawyers, very impressive, who got very high up in the Bureau. But I don't think there's any type of tie I think
Yeah.
that's individual.
Yeah, no, that it is quite interesting. You mentioned that not having that fallback it makes you or your scenario made you more kind of hungry and you know going for it, I suppose. You mentioned the training. What did that look like for the FBI?
Um, well, I came from the military environment, so I was fully expecting it to be, yelling at us, throwing trash cans, just very intense. And it wasn't anything like that. It was very professional, fine with on the physical side, fine. The common stuff you'd expect, boxing, defensive tactics, running all the time, obstacle courses, stuff like that, fine. I would say the academic portion was very intense. There was I remember someone saying that, after 21 weeks, you basically have the equivalent of a law degree because there's so much law. There's so many classes on the law, federal law. That was very impressive. I mean, my law professor, she didn't have one note. I mean, she literally taught every class without a note. She
Wow.
was amazing. Um, just very impressive. And I would tell you that the firearms training there, and I had some very good firearms training at the police department. But that firearms training unit at the FBI is unbelievable. They are really, really good, and they made us very, very good. So I would say that was the most impressive thing I saw was kind of the firearms training, just how good we got because we shot all the time. It was like 10,000 rounds or something in 21 weeks.
Wow.
Uh, yeah,
Is that
very.
like what is if you compare other than the frequency and consistency of the shooting, compare that to your previous training, what makes that training is just the instructor in the way they're teaching, is it just far superior?
And yeah, and they use all kinds of technology and training aids. I mean, they did finger overlays, blind man shooting. So you could be holding a gun on a computer. They would press the trigger while you're lining up the sights, and they would prove to you that basically what you're doing is you're manipulating the trigger. And so what I mean by that, for those people that don't have a lot of firearms experience, at 3 yards when this because the sights are always going to move, okay, with a handgun. It doesn't matter if you're an Olympic shooter or an amateur, the sights are going to move a little bit. And what happens is people will see the sights move and then they think it's perfect and they'll snatch the trigger, right? It's called snatching the trigger. Well, you can do that at 3 feet, 3 yards, and it's really indistinguishable on the target. But way back where we were shooting in the FBI, like 50 yards with a pistol, now it's off the target. Okay. It's all the way off. So what they taught us was how to, like you see my finger? I
Hmm.
can I can make my finger do a 90 degree, not curling this way, but making it flat. They taught us to do that with a rubber band. So we were in class all day long with a rubber band, teaching our finger to move 90 degrees to the rear so we didn't disrupt the trigger very much when our sights were lined up. But you do it all the time. And so for me, not only, I mean, they have very professional program. The instructors are full time. That's all they do. And the people who are instructors are like world class shooters. I mean, I had a guy, SAS guy. So we had people from the UK, we had people from South Africa, we had an Olympic shooter. I mean, just very, very impressive resumes who were teaching us. And the SAS guy was great because he was talking about gunfights and, how do you get out of a car quickly? Because he learned that in Northern Ireland. Like, okay, this guy had really done it for real, not some nonsense. And so that was great.
So you mentioned so you do your training 21 weeks, and then you're assigned, albeit somewhat randomly, to go to Omaha, Nebraska. And like, what happens? Like, you go there, and like, what was the next?
You get assigned to a squad, and you get into a field. So either white collar crime or violent crime or counterintelligence, counterterrorism. So I was assigned to a white collar crime squad. It was a nightmare. I was working bankruptcy fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, bank fraud, just mundane. It's crazy. I hated it. And I did that for about 4 months. And I was shooting one day at the firearms range, and the drug supervisor saw me and he said, "Hey, weren't you a police officer before?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, you want to come work for me on the narcotics squad?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." And so luckily he saved me. I got transferred, so I was assigned to a drug squad. I was working back then they called them Mexican drug trafficking organizations. Now they're just cartels. But I was assigned that, and I was working with the police department and a big task force environment. But then I got on the every FBI office has a SWAT team, so I got on that team, which was great. So I was able to work cases and also be on the SWAT team. So we were doing high risk arrest, and one of the things we would do is close protection. So I started doing some protection of Supreme Court justices and Attorney General Ashcroft. So I really liked that work. I thought, okay, there's something to this. I like the idea of protecting another human being, and so that I really kind of started thinking about that from a career standpoint. Then we had 9/11. I got involved in terrorism, but I was still thinking about protection. And that fast forward to 2004, and I got in the FBI Director's Protection Detail, and I got transferred to Washington, D.C. I was selected, and I was with Bob Mueller for 4 years. He was the FBI Director before Comey.
So
Yeah.
how did that work? You just like they saw you were particularly good at had the right attributes for that role, then someone says, "Hey, we'd like you to move into this."
Yep, that's exactly what happened. You put in a resume and they select, a lot of people put in, they maybe have one, two positions. I got selected. My family and I moved from Omaha to Washington, D.C., and I started working, nothing but protection with Director Mueller. And that's a 24/7, 365 gig. Best assignment I had in the FBI, bar none. I went to the UK, I don't know, 8 times. I was there on right after 7/7. I mean, I went all over the world. I went to like 58 countries. It was great.
And so, like that, what does that world look like? Because, I think it's like a lot of these roles, you see things if you're not involved with it, you see things in the films and movies, and you think, oh, that's what it is, a guy with an earpiece and whatever. Like, I'm sure it's not quite as simple as that.
Well, it may not be as simple as that, but it definitely is that. It's definitely uh, guys with training in suits and earpieces, and their sole focus is protection of one human being, and that's all they do. And I loved it. I was because there was very little oversight. There wasn't a lot of bureaucratic nonsense over us. We were able to do our job and do it very well, and it was a great job for us. That's exactly what it looks like. But it's a lot of travel. I was gone like 297 days my first year, so
Wow.
you're living out of a suitcase, and that's very difficult. And you know how travel is. If you don't eat right and you're not getting a lot of sleep, it's very difficult. So I mean, I enjoyed it, but that thing has a shelf life, and so after 4 years, I decided to step off and become an instructor down back at Quantico at the FBI Academy. I was a tactical instructor down there, teaching new agents how to not get killed.
When it comes to that again, that kind of protective detail work, like. Is there, or are there, I should say, like a lot of threats day to day on someone of that profile, or is it more about like just making sure nothing gets even close to that point?
Yeah, I think it's super important to always remember that threats are the thing that are designed to create anxiety. So if someone says, "Hey, I'm going to kill you, Charles," that's really not a there's really not a lot of evidence that that actually happens, right? So John Hinckley didn't threaten Reagan, Sirhan didn't threaten Kennedy, Yigal Amir didn't threaten Yitzhak Rabin. These are all assassins.
Yeah.
What happens is the ones that are showing up. So people that show up at home, work, in transit at known locations, golf course, or something that you do as a routine. That's something that we really pay attention to. A person who keeps showing up, like the guy that drove from Las Vegas to New York to shoot up the NFL headquarters recently here in the US. He didn't threaten those folks. He just showed up. So that's for us, we get very concerned about. People just kind of show up unannounced, and then it's really troubling when they show up, say, at church and at the office. And we
Okay.
know that. right? To us, that's more, okay, we really have to pay attention here because that individual has now shown a real, kind of determination to follow us. And that usually is a pre-incident indicator of violence is coming your way or some type of inappropriate encounter. It may not be violence. It could be a Nigel Farage milkshake thrown on, some type of
Yes.
embarrassing attack. But yeah, that's far more concerning. But the threat is what gets everyone's attention. Oh, so and so threatened so and so. And, to me, it's like interesting but irrelevant.
Yep. So, so when you're curious, like, when you're traveling around the world, as a protection agent for the FBI director, do you you obviously have to fall in line with it. So when you come to the UK, for example, can you carry a firearm because of your FBI and what you're doing, or do you have to follow the UK law, which is that you can't necessarily, like, how does that even work?
Yeah, every single country is different, but I would tell you that just because you're an FBI agent does not mean you're going to be carrying your gun in whatever country you want because you're an FBI agent. You don't have any jurisdiction in a foreign country, and you don't have any authority in a foreign country. And so the only way you're carrying a firearm is if the Ministry of Interior or well, what is it, the Home Office in the
Yeah,
UK, if they agree and give you a weapons permit,
right.
that's the only way that happens. Now, am I going to say there are U.S. government people who are maybe carrying without that? Probably. Hell, I don't know. But there's no legal, you don't have any authority. So your ass is going to prison if you get caught, right? So for me, I had to make sure that I had the host government's approval, working through our ambassador, that we would be allowed to carry. And many times they would not allow us to carry. And hey, man, get over it. Because, one thing we have to always remember, and I didn't know this back then, which I do know now, is that there's no evidence that that actually has anything to do with anti-assassination strategies. So what I mean by that is just because you have a firearm doesn't mean it plays any role at all in stopping an assassination. In fact, the Trump shooting on the golf course was really the first time we've ever seen that happen, where a protector has preemptively used a firearm to stop an attack. So if you look at like Reagan or you look at Rabin or some of these other ones I've mentioned, they're all armed. Everyone at the Reagan shooting was armed. They didn't shoot John Hinckley. They didn't fire one round. It just doesn't happen, right? So it's just not really that big of a deal. There's just no evidence of it, right? But when I was an FBI agent, I certainly thought that having the gun made me a protector, but it's not. It's the ability to think defensively. It's the ability to understand time and distance. It's the ability to move the protectee quickly away from a problem instead of getting involved in a problem. And that's a big piece of it. But yeah, so if we carry or we don't carry, to me, that's not nearly as important as if, they make things very dangerous for us. And I've had that happen to me, in a number of countries where they would, put us in positions that I don't care how many guns I have, this is a problem. Does that make sense?
Certainly, yeah, yeah. And when it comes to, say, if you take a year working as a close protection officer for FBI director on this example, like, how many would you say close calls happen in that period of time? Or is it more again about just making sure you didn't even get anywhere near that kind of position?
Yeah, very few. And a lot of it I can tell you that very few. There have been things that have happened that were we targeted by because it was him? I don't know. Or were we targeted because we were Americans in the wrong
Right.
place at the wrong time? Probably. Um, but if you don't know what you are, you got to remember there's a deterrent piece to it also. So you don't know what you are stopping. So what I mean by that is by having an outward presence, what we call an overt protective model, where a bad guy who's planning can see us and he might look at us. There's a thing I write about all the time, the attack cycle, where they're doing pre-operational surveillance and they're looking to see, hey, can I get to this guy? Like you mentioned Warren Buffett earlier. Can I get to that guy? Can I get close enough? It's all about distance. Can I get close enough to hurt him or what I want to do? And then when they're doing that pre-operational surveillance, if they see a protective team that's pretty good and they're vigilant and they're in shape and they're paying attention, the bad guy might say, you know what, it's too tough. I can't get close enough. And we know that that's actually happened in history. Um, so there's a deterrent piece that's hard for us to measure, but I certainly know that that's part of it, and it does keep things from happening. I know that for a fact, but I do also know that a lot of times you have to give a lot of space, and sometimes you can't give any space. But you take a guy like Bob Mueller, back in the day, and most people didn't know who he was, right? And so if you're in a grocery store with him, why not give him a lot of space? Because, the chances of someone happening upon him in some type of organized attack are very, very low. So give him space, and they appreciate that. Um, and then when you can't, you get closer.
And with again with someone like him, are you? You said 24/7, 365. So like, is this a rota of agents that are, when you're sleeping or taking your break, whatever? Like, there's another person, and it's literally all the time, no matter what the person's doing or where they are. Like, there's someone
Yeah.
around.
Yep.
So then you move on to, is it a company called Gavin de Becker, if I pronounced that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. Gavin DeBecker. Basically, what happened was I was teaching down at Quantico, and the FBI asked me to create a close protection school just for FBI agents. So I did. And I created a 2-week school that basically FBI agents and other three-letter agencies like the DEA and the U.S. Marshal Service, ATF, they started to send agents to me to train them to do close protection, very, very small details, like 3, 4 agent size details. So much smaller than the Secret Service, for instance. And anyway, I had known of Gavin because he wrote a book called The Gift of Fear. So, all of your listeners, I highly recommend that book. It talks about intuition, it talks about pre-incident indicators to violence. It basically gives you language so you understand it's okay to be a little concerned about human beings in your space, and you're not being paranoid, and you're not being judgmental, and you're not doing any of that crap. You're literally using your body's defense mechanisms to keep yourself safe from violence. And it's called The Gift of Fear.
Mhm.
So we used to issue that to FBI agents. And anyway, someone else had told me, hey, Gavin DeBecker actually owns a protection company where he has bodyguards for like the ultra rich. I'm like, what? So I looked him up and I read that he had another book called Just 2 Seconds, which was all about close protection. And that's where, I was talking about the statistics of using guns in an actual, protective thing. There's no evidence. I got that from that book. I didn't know that. So I read the book, and in the book, there's some drills that he does. And I took those drills and I put them in the FBI training. I didn't ask for permission. I just did it. And so I get a communication from him. I thought it was email, maybe phone call. I don't remember. He said, hey, are you using my stuff at the FBI? And I was like, oh shit. Like I didn't ask for permission. I just did it. And because why did I do it? Because it made sense. And I've always used common sense as a guide my entire life. And so because it was smart stuff. And so I said, yes, sir, we are. And he said, well, can I help you in any way whatsoever? So then I started asking him, and we basically began this relationship where we would talk, and then something would happen in the world, some type of shooting, assassination attempt, and he and I would start to work it and do a case study and think about what happened and why it went bad and what the protectors were doing, like hours long conversations. And basically we realized that we were, very, very similar people. So he offered me a job, and I was short of retirement, 2015, and I had to make a call, and I had to decide, am I going to walk away from the government and go private sector, or am I going to say no to this golden opportunity? And I said yes. And I left the government, very rare. I was very happy to do that. And I went to work for him as a director of protection strategies, and I ended up becoming a senior vice president. I worked for 9 years for him. It's a Los Angeles-based firm, but they got clients all over the world. We have, at the time, about 500 employees, protectors, they're
Wow.
called. Not These aren't like contractors. These are full-time employees that go through Gavin's training, which I was leading, and then we put them on a client. And yeah, all over the world. Very, very impressive organization. I worked for him, yeah, till 2024. So from 2015 to 2024, then I started my own company called the Hamilton Security Group.
Did Gavin, as a business actual individual, was he in again at the FBI previously, or what was his close background?
No, he grew up in trauma, and he understood protection. He understood how trauma affects you and makes you want to protect people. And he kind of lucked out. He was in college at USC, and his roommate, literally his next door neighbor, was a guy named Robert Redford. And Robert Redford was not a big time movie star at the time, but he was getting notoriety. and he was going to go overseas or something. He was telling Gavin about it, and Gavin's like, "Well, I'll protect you," because they were going to try to assign him. I think the studio was trying to assign him protection, and Gavin's like, "I'll do it." So Gavin went with him. And then Gavin started. He looked around LA and he saw, like who was doing close protection back then. It was basically just big, huge, what I call pay by the pound type guys. They're just 300-pound monsters, but they don't really know what they're doing. Not to say they all didn't know what they're
Yeah.
doing, but a lot of people, it's just an illusion, right? And so Gavin, 41 years ago, he started his own little company, and he was really a consultant. He was just consulting celebrities on how to do protection and threat assessment. And then he started his own deal. And then he created what it is today, which is, well, it's the best close protection firm in the world. I mean, I think. He created threat assessment and then the entire executive protection program that, a lot of what we were running in the bureau and what we were doing at Gavin is just, it's really groundbreaking, all of it. Very interesting stuff.
What in your like expert opinion makes someone particularly good at being a protection officer versus again these people that are just big, scary looking, but actually like, you know, you're better off having someone that actually knows what they're doing, right?
Yeah, a couple of real big things there. One is the biggest difference between the government side protection and private sector is the resources. So on the private side, the client's paying the bill. It's not the U.S. taxpayer. And so, in the U.S. taxpayer model, you might have seven or eight agents assigned, and they can, be good or not good. It doesn't really, the taxpayer doesn't get a vote in the matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter, right? Like, unless their supervisor is going to fire them, which is very rare in the government, they're probably going to accept mediocrity. Okay. On the private side, there is no such acceptance of mediocrity because the client is paying the freight. And the client might only pay for one, maybe two protectors tops. So what does that tell you? That protector damn well better be good. Okay. They really got to be good because they can't hide in the masses. And
Mm.
so for me, the one, and I train them every day, is you got to be smart. I can teach you to do pull-ups. I can teach you to do cover and evacuation. I can teach you to respond to an attack, but I cannot teach you to be smart, right? I cannot teach you to have common sense. I just can't. You have to have had it. You got to have grown up, and had some education, and you got to be smart enough to come in out of the rain, as we say over here, or at least get a damn umbrella, right? But if you have to call me, hey, sir, what do I do? It's raining. I cannot help you,
Sure.
right? Like you're too stupid to be here. And so for me, that's what makes so two things make really good protection officers. One, they're smart, and two, they understand customer service. So some of the best bodyguards I've ever seen came from like the Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons. They understand customer service. They understand because man, that's what this is all about. Um, it's not always about the bullets and the bombs and all that crap, right? I heard it said one time, can you find a kumquat at 3 a.m.? Well, if you can do that, you're probably a damn good bodyguard. Yeah, like because it means you understand how to get things accomplished because it's really hard. And that's the biggest thing for me. Are you a problem solver? Can you get to yes? That's the thing. Are you good with people? Can you get to yes? How to win friends and influence people. Hopefully you've read that book 1,000 times because that'll make you a damn good protection officer.
Hmm. What do you find now with the advent of social media and particularly with, I suppose, high profile celebrities that are probably oversharing often, like where they are at the exact time. Therefore, for example, in the UK, it's been apparent with professional athletes,
Yep.
then when they're playing a game, it's obvious that they're not going to be at their residential home. And
Yep.
there's been a lot of kind of burglaries at that specific time.
Yep.
Do you find that as a going concern for clients?
1,000,000%. Yeah, you nailed it. And then obviously it's predictable. So we always say if it's predictable, it's preventable. So if you're a high profile athlete, that's a good example. Their schedules are publicized well in advance. So any idiot can go, okay, the guy plays for Manchester United and he's on an away game and then find out where he lives. I mean, it's not that hard. So then the big piece is, okay, hopefully they have security and then hopefully they're doing security correctly. So I just gave you two very important things. One, they have security. That's not all players do, and that I know of. And then secondly, are they doing it correctly? What do I mean by that? Okay, like in the US, a, a version of residential security is a couple of guys in a car out on the street.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's not going to get it done. Okay, that's not going to get it done. That's an illusion of security. Why? Because they can't see half the damn house, for one. Two, they probably fall asleep. Three, they got to go to the bathroom. It's just not effective. Versus they're inside a home in a command center, backed up by alarms, beams, electrical countermeasures. Now you got something. Now you have real security. And you've probably seen it. There are athletes and celebrities who have really good security, and these people get stopped. And then there are athletes and celebrities who don't have very good security, and then you read about, oh, their house was broken into and vandalized or things were stolen. Well, bad security or no security.
And so now you've moved on to your own company. What's the focus there? Like, I see you do a lot of speaking engagements and kind of, I suppose, training and developing the next generation, but also I presume you're also involved with actively, close protection for clients, right?
Yeah, my two main verticals are one is US executive protection. So it's not like the UK where you all have an SIA license and there's like a process for a person to be, performing security services for a high net worth individual in the UK. We don't have that in the US. So I really understand the civilian side of protection in the US and how the markets work. I understand the licensing requirements in the various states because it's all done by the states, not by the federal government. And so what I do is like after a United Health shooting, for instance, companies are kind of panicking, what do we do for our CEO? The very first thing my company does is I consult with the company and the CEO specifically on, hey, do you need close protection? Do you need that in your life? Are you willing to take the imposition that is going to come with having close protection? Because you are literally sharing your life now with some people. That's what happens, right? Or do you need a risk assessment and a vulnerability assessment to understand where your gaps are in your security? And then maybe we just shore those gaps up, and then you don't need a close protection team. And so that's one thing is I do consultation. If they have a team already, I do training of that team and I do an assessment of that team to see, are they any good? And then on the other vertical, I teach personal security awareness to regular people. How do you keep yourself safe just living, man, just going to work, active shooter, active threat, you know, Ariana Grande concert. What would I do if I was in that situation? Or I'm in France and there's a motor vehicle running people over. How do I survive that? So I do a lot of that. It's called the safety seminar, and I speak to rooms of 100 to 1,000 people at a time about just real quick things they can really do to keep themselves safe, practicing proper situational awareness. So those are really the main two verticals of my company. I mean, that we're laser focused right in those areas. It's very niche, it's very small, but it's really what we do really, really well.
Going on to on the first vertical you're mentioning about assessing executive level CEO, that kind of thing. When you're looking at a CEO, what determines whether they need that close protection or whether or not they can do without?
Yeah, it really depends on what am I seeing with regards to not the threats, but the traffic. You know, what I mean by that is, okay, I'll just walk you through one. Okay, so let's say your company's ABC Inc. Okay, ABC Inc. How many people did you terminate last year? And they say, oh, 5,000. Okay, did any of those go poorly? Oh yeah, there was this one guy. He was he was armed at the termination, and he said he's going to get even with all of us. Okay, who's monitoring that guy? And then the answer, of course, is going to be what? No,
Nobody. Yeah.
right? And then I ask, well, has that guy ever shown up? And then you might hear something like, oh, yeah, he actually showed up at the CEO's house one time. Oh, did anyone know about that? Because I'm doing multiple interviews, and let's say I'm talking to the CEO's wife, and she says, oh, yeah, that time that guy showed up. And you're like, what guy? And you get the name. And sure enough, that's the guy that was in the difficult termination. But the company doesn't know anything about it because the two aren't talking.
Right.
So if I saw a situation like that, I would say to the CEO, you need a protective team because you've already had an inappropriate pursuit at your home by someone you've terminated, by someone they have a reason, they have motive. Something like that or let's say they're involved in a business practice. It's highly controversial. They're receiving all kinds of negative publicity. They're receiving protests at the home. They're getting protests at the office. Every time they speak, there's some type of, somebody throwing something at them. Yeah, they probably need a team, versus you've got a CEO with very low profile, not involved in a controversial business practice. has no inappropriate, stuff going on. I might just say a residential security program is probably all you need, and then maybe I train you on situational awareness, driving your routes until and maybe they live in a part of the world that's very kind of mm, I wouldn't say mundane, but
Stable.
well, and maybe there's not because you got to look at it. There's a number of ways you're looking at risk. There's an individual risk just by position, but there could be a risk just on environment. So you could live in a city, for instance, that's like known for carjacking, and you might get carjacked not because you're the CEO of ABC
Yeah.
Inc., but just because you're in the wrong place, wrong time. And
Hmm.
so maybe we get you an armored vehicle, or maybe I give you some training and what to do in that situation. But that doesn't have anything to do with you by name. It has to do with wrong place, wrong time. So yeah, those are some of the things I'm thinking about. Not everything, but that's a lot of it.
And then, and then I suppose like, quite a nice place to potentially leave that is you mentioned you do a lot of training for individuals who um, aren't high profile people, but can find themselves in maybe ugly situations or potentially ugly
Yeah.
situations. What's the sort of kind of key advice you give to people? I'm sure it's far more in depth than this, but just kind of people to kind of watch out for or take away.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing is their awareness. I mean, the most important thing they could do is just turn off the noise. And what I mean by that is put the thing, the distraction device you call a phone, or your mobile, put it in your pocket. Okay. Get your head up, take the earbuds out, and start paying attention. Okay. That's the very first thing, right? So if I'm walking around Paris or I'm walking around London or I'm walking around Madrid, my head is up and my ears are listening. So what am I listening for? Well, okay, if I hear a crowd screaming, right, I'm not going to think this something good's happening, like celebrity or something interesting. No, something bad's probably happening. So I want to get away from that. But I will never hear the crowd if I have earbuds in.
Mm,
Or I'm hearing for an engine that starts to rev louder than the other cars. What would that be indicative of? Oh, a vehicle attack, which Europe is known for, right? Or not known for, but you have a lot of them.
sure.
And so then what do? I get off the street. I get off the street, or I pay particular attention to bollards, vehicle bollards. When I'm walking in a European or a city, are there vehicle bollards? And what side of the vehicle bollards am I on? I want to be on the right side, the correct side, so that if a car did start to do that, I'd have some protection. But I'm getting off the street, I'm getting into a venue. I'm not drinking. If I drink in the hotel and I'm going to bed, but I'm not out and about drinking because it numbs my senses. It numbs my awareness, right? All those things are very, very helpful. A lot of people don't do that. They don't want to do that. They'll say things to me like, "Well, I don't want to live that way." Okay. I mean, I can't make you pay attention. But if you let your body do its job, it can do some amazing things, but you got to get out of its way. And people, unfortunately, because what's happened in our culture is, and you'll see it in my presentation, I show a number of pictures of humans, and they're all in the same position. That's the position of head down, slumped over, looking at the phone.
Hmm.
And the reason that is because the dopamine response from this phone is far more addictive than the ability to keep yourself safe from the human that's out there that might want to hurt you, right?
Mm,
Because that's not sure. They don't know that's going to happen, but they know for a fact the phone is telling them, oh, so and so likes you, and they want that dopamine hit.
right.
And so they're addicted to it. But I'm fighting against it on a daily basis. I want people to be aware. I want people to, have a flashlight in their hand and not use their phone as a flashlight. Flashlight's a powerful weapon. It's a powerful tool, but people just don't want to do that. So that's the very first thing I tell your listeners is just be aware and listen to your intuition. If it feels like it's not right, it's not right, and listen to that and get away from it. Get the hell away from it. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where, well, I know jujitsu or I know boxing, I'm going to get it on. Well, you may not be good enough. I hate to tell you, because there's always someone out there bigger and badder than you are. So why risk it? Just get the hell away from it. But the only way you can get the hell away from it is if you're paying attention.
I think that's a nice place to leave our conversation for today. But I really appreciate your time, and it's been super interesting to learn about the career and how you've got to where you are, and also the advice I think is really interesting too.
You're welcome. And if your listeners like any of that, check me out. I have a YouTube channel. I'm on Instagram. Have a thing called Safety Seconds with James, and it's all about keeping yourself safe.
I'll pop some links in when we post this for you for
All
sure.
right.
Thank you,
Thanks.
James.
All right, buddy.